Imagine for a moment that we are standing on the shores of the Aegean Sea nearly 3,000 years ago. The air is thick with salt, and the sound of waves crashing against the wooden hulls of 1,000 ships creates a steady, almost hypnotic rhythm. There are no books, no internet, no mass-written records. Everything that defines a civilization, its values, its fears, and its history, lives solely in the memory and the voices of the rhapsodes, those wandering poets who traveled through courts narrating the deeds of gods and men. In this setting emerges the foundational work of Western literature, a piece of narrative architecture so perfect that, after 28 centuries, it continues to dictate the rules of how we tell stories. I am referring, of course, to Homer's Iliad. To understand the magnitude of this text, we must first dive into the mystery of its author. What scholars call the Homeric question is the debate over whether Homer was truly a single person, a blind poet from the region of Ionia, or if the name is simply a label for a collective tradition spanning centuries of oral poetry. Modern linguistic analysis suggests that the Iliad is the result of a crystallization process, where shorter songs about the Trojan War were woven together and refined until they formed the monumental structure we know today. We are talking about the 8th century before our era, a time when Greece was emerging from its dark ages and beginning to forge its identity. The Iliad is not just a war poem, it is the mirror in which the Greeks looked at themselves to understand what it meant to be human, what it meant to die, and above all, what it meant to achieve glory. To grasp the Iliad, we must shed the idea that it is a complete chronicle of the Trojan War. Many make the mistake of thinking the poem narrates the entire 10 years of the conflict, from the abduction of Helen to the fall of the city with the famous wooden horse. But Homer is far more sophisticated than a mere historian. He chooses a much narrower and deeper narrative angle. The poem focuses exclusively on 51 days of the 10th year of the war, and more specifically, it focuses on a human emotion. The first word of the poem in its original language is menin, which translates to wrath or rage. The Iliad is, at its core, a psychological study of the rage of Achilles and the devastating consequences it has for both his allies and his enemies. The plot kicks off with a conflict of ego and power. Agamemnon, the king of kings and leader of the Greek expedition, insults Achilles' honor by seizing his war prize, a woman named Briseis. For an ancient hero, honor was not an internal feeling, it was something tangible. If your prize was taken, your value in society was taken. Achilles, the most powerful warrior in history, decides then to withdraw from the battle. This act of passive rebellion brings the Greeks, also called the Achaeans, to the brink of annihilation. While Achilles stays in his tent consumed by resentment, the Trojans, led by the noble and brave Hector, begin to gain ground, pushing the Greeks back to their own ships. This tension leads us to explore the deep deconstruction of the themes Homer weaves into his tale. The central concept dominating the psyche of the characters is kleos, which we can translate as immortal glory. In a world without a clear concept of an afterlife or a spiritual paradise, the only way to defeat death was for others to continue speaking your name through the centuries. Kleos was the currency of existence, but to obtain kleos, you had to be willing to pay the highest price, your life. This is where the tragedy of Achilles appears. He knows his fate. His mother, the goddess Thetis, has revealed that he has two options. He can stay in Troy, die young, and win an eternal fame that will never fade, or he can return home, live a long and peaceful life, but be forgotten by history as soon as the last of his descendants dies. This choice represents the ultimate existential dilemma. Is a life of peace worth it if you leave no mark on the world? Homer seems to suggest that the human condition is tragic precisely because our greatness is tied to our finitude. While we analyze this desire for glory, we must look at how Homer handles the duality between the human and the divine. The gods in the Iliad are not distant or moral figures. They are, in reality, narrative projections of the forces of nature and the psychological impulses of men. When Athena descends from Olympus to stop Achilles before he draws his sword against Agamemnon, we shouldn't see it only as magical intervention. It is a narrative representation of the moment when reason prevails over violent impulse. The gods are capricious, vengeful, and curiously far less serious than the humans. Why? Because the gods are immortal. Nothing they do has final consequences. If a god is wounded, they heal. If a god's side loses, they can wait until the next century to try again. In contrast, for human heroes, every decision is absolute. Mortality is what gives life weight and meaning. That is why, despite all the divine machinery, the heart of the poem beats in the chests of the mortals bleeding on the plains of Troy. This focus allows us to observe the contrast between the two great pillars of the work, Achilles and Hector. Achilles is a force of nature, an individual driven by his own desires and his own fury. He is the archetype of the alienated hero. Hector, on the other hand, is the quintessential social man. He does not fight for personal glory, but for his father, for his wife Andromache, for his son, and for the citizens of his city. Hector is the character we can most identify with today. There is a deeply moving scene in the 6th book where Hector says goodbye to his family before returning to combat. His young son is frightened by the sight of his father's bronze helmet with its horsehair crest. Hector removes the helmet, laughs, and hugs the child. In that small gesture, Homer reminds us that behind the armor and the warrior status, there is a human vulnerability that transcends time. It is the conflict between public duty and private love, a theme that remains at the core of much of our modern storytelling, from family dramas to superhero movies. However, the narrative takes a dark turn when Achilles' rage is transformed. After rejecting all of Agamemnon's offers of peace, Achilles allows his best friend, and possibly his lover Patroclus, to enter battle wearing his armor to inspire the Greeks. Patroclus dies at the hands of Hector, and it is at this point that the work reaches a terrifying intensity. Achilles' rage, which was previously a matter of wounded honor, turns into pure, nihilistic, and destructive grief. He is no longer interested in prizes, nor honor, nor kleos. He is only interested in revenge. When Achilles returns to the battlefield, he no longer seems like a man, he seems like a demon or an elemental force. Homer's description of the slaughter Achilles causes is so visceral that even the river Scamander becomes enraged with him because its waters are choked with corpses. Here we enter one of the most fascinating areas of modern narratology, the concept of the tragic hero who crosses the line into inhumanity. Achilles loses his humanity by refusing to eat, refusing to sleep, and by attempting to desecrate Hector's body after killing him in single combat. To understand the gravity of this act of desecration, we must understand the importance of funeral rituals in the ancient world. Denying burial to an enemy was not just an act of hatred, it was condemning their soul to wander eternally without rest. Achilles drags Hector's body around the walls of Troy for days, desperately trying to ease his own pain through cruelty. But this is where the Iliad performs its most brilliant and human turn. The poem does not end with Hector's death, nor with the destruction of the city. It ends with a nighttime encounter in Achilles' tent. The elderly King Priam, Hector's father, crosses enemy lines, risking his life to beg Achilles to return his son's body. It is one of the most powerful moments in the history of literature. Priam tells Achilles, "Remember your father, who is the same age as I am and is on the threshold of old age." In that instant, the mutual recognition of suffering breaks the barrier of hatred. Both weep together, one for his lost son and the other for his absent father and for his friend Patroclus. Achilles regains his humanity through empathy. This message is of staggering relevance. It tells us that even in the midst of the most brutal war, what makes us human is our ability to recognize the pain in the other, even in our bitterest enemy. Homer's ability to capture the totality of the human experience leads us to analyze the legacy and current relevance of the Iliad in our contemporary world. Although the technology of war has changed, the psychology of combat remains the same. Modern psychologists working with war veterans have used the Iliad to explain post-traumatic stress disorder. The concept of Achilles' berserker rage, or the emotional collapse after the loss of a comrade, are precise clinical descriptions. The Iliad functions as a mirror for our own identity crises and our relationship with violence. In an era of global conflicts and extreme polarization, the message of the meeting between Priam and Achilles resonates with renewed force. Furthermore, the impact of the Iliad on the architecture of fiction is incalculable. The entire idea of the three-act structure, character development, and the use of symbols has its roots here. Take, for example, the shield of Achilles, to which Homer devotes entire pages of description. This shield is not just a weapon, it is a representation of the entire known universe: cities at peace, cities at war, weddings, trials, harvests, and the ocean that surrounds the world. It is what critics call a microcosm, a small object that contains the entire world. This technique of using an object to expand the narrative universe is something we see today in everything from science fiction to complex art house cinema. If we look toward popular culture, we see that the Iliad remains the blueprint for our modern epics. Stories like Star Wars or The Lord of the Rings drink directly from Homer's source. The concept of the hero who must choose between his destiny and his personal desires, the figure of the wise but flawed mentor, and the idea that war is not a glorious adventure but a necessary tragedy that always leaves scars are all Homeric themes. Even in the age of algorithms and artificial intelligence, the questions the Iliad raises about what makes us unique and what we are willing to sacrifice to be remembered remain without a definitive answer. The Iliad is not an old book. It is an eternal book that is rewritten every time a reader faces the question of what it means to live a purposeful life. This inevitably leads us to another crucial aspect, the role of women in the Iliad. Although it is often perceived as a purely masculine work about warriors and muscle, a closer analysis reveals that the women are the ones who provide the ethical and emotional meaning to the plot. Helen is not just a pretty face that launched 1,000 ships. She is a character tormented by guilt and loneliness, caught in a web of divine desires and human politics. Andromache represents the voice of reason that questions the madness of war. Cassandra is the visionary whom no one listens to. Homer uses these female characters to show the invisible victims of masculine glory. The true deconstruction of the hero occurs when we see the impact of his actions on the lives of those who did not choose the war. In this sense, the Iliad is a work much more critical of violence than it appears at first glance. Homer does not glorify the slaughter. He describes it with brutal honesty so that we feel the weight of every spear that pierces a chest and the cry of every mother left without a son. But to understand this fully, we must look at the philosophy underlying the very structure of the Homeric cosmos. The concept of Moira, or fate, is fundamental. Not even the gods can change what has been decreed by destiny. This idea might seem deterministic, as if we humans were mere puppets. However, the Iliad proposes something more complex. Fate sets the end of the road, but it is the human who decides how to walk that path. Hector knows that Troy will fall, but he chooses to fight with dignity. Achilles knows he will die, but he chooses how his death will be. Human greatness resides in the conscious acceptance of our limitations. We are limited beings who aspire to the limitless. That is the tension that keeps the flame of Western narrative alive. It is fascinating to note that, although the Iliad deals with a specific war in a specific place, its language has become universal. Homer's metaphors, such as comparing an army to a swarm of bees or the fall of a warrior to a tall tree being felled by a woodsman, connect us with nature in a way that modern prose often forgets. Homer understands that human life is not separate from the natural world, but part of an eternal cycle of growth and decay. By reading or listening to the Iliad, we remember that our most intense emotions are the same ones felt by those men of bronze. We haven't changed that much. Our technology is more advanced, our cities are larger, but the human heart still beats with the same rhythms that Homer captured in his dactylic hexameter verses. The Iliad teaches us that heroism does not consist of being invincible, but of being brave despite vulnerability. Achilles is the strongest warrior, but he is also the most emotionally fragile. Hector is a great leader, but he feels fear in the face of death. In this complexity lies the truth of the work. Homer doesn't give us cardboard cutout heroes. He gives us human beings with all their contradictions. That's why when we return to these pages, we don't do it out of nostalgia for a mythical past, but out of the need to understand ourselves in the present. The Iliad is a navigation tool for the human soul, a map of the internal storms we all must cross. At the end of this long journey across the plains of Troy, we realize that the true theme of the Iliad is not war, but reconciliation. The poem begins with a destructive conflict and ends with a respectful funeral. It begins with the fury of one man and ends with the shared tears of two enemies. It is a reminder that the possibility of finding common ground exists. The Iliad asks us to look beyond our own walls, beyond our own tribal identities, to recognize the shared fragility of life. It is a call to radical empathy that remains as revolutionary today as it was in ancient times. We have explored the Iliad as a historical artifact, as a masterpiece of psychology, and as a pillar of storytelling. We have seen how its themes of honor, glory, fate, and humanity continue to vibrate in our current culture. Homer's work is not a static monument, it is a living conversation that continues to challenge our certainties. It forces us to look death in the face and decide what truly matters. Is it the accumulation of power, the pursuit of fleeting fame, or the ability to connect with another human being in the moment of deepest pain? The answer Homer offers us is subtle but profound. Life is short, often unfair, and always ends in silence. But what we do with our time, the way we love, and the dignity with which we face our fate is what finally makes us immortal. And so we close this journey through the epic of epics. I hope this deconstruction has allowed you to see the Iliad not as a boring school text, but as the explosion of human creativity and wisdom that it truly is. The next time you hear the sound of the sea or feel an uncontrollable rage, remember that thousands of years ago, a poet named Homer already put those feelings into words, reminding us that we are never alone in our struggle. Thank you for joining me in this deep analysis. If this essay has sparked a desire in you to return to the source or to explore the myths that shape us, my mission as a critic and storyteller will have been fulfilled. Keep searching for beauty in stories and truth in verses, because within them lies the memory of who we are and the promise of what we can become. Until our paths cross again in another great story.